So first tip, do less but better. And so concretely, I'd say cut whatever you're planning to do in half. And this idea originally came from, I was doing a little talk to some really small group of teachers about responsive teaching, my book. And one of them said, well, look, I'm an NQT. What's one practical thing that I should do today? And I was like, look, take a look at your lesson plan. Look, it's never all going to stick. There's loads of stuff in there. Just like cut half of the things, half of the activities, and then pick a few things that are really valuable, important, and spend more time on them. And so instead of saying we're going to do 7 different activities, it's going to be 6 minutes, I'm going to have to prepare each one. I'm going to say, like, I'm going to get one text, one problem, one thing, and we're going to spend longer on it, but I'm going to think harder about, okay, how will I introduce it? How will I revisit it? What will students do with it? So hopefully it'll be easier on me, and I'll kind of get more bang for my buck, more thinking out of it. And then for the sort of fractal part, you could do that for a lesson, but you could also do that for a school improvement plan. You could do it for a professional development session. Just pick the 1 or 2 things that are really important and do them really well. And no one's going to do like your 27 things on your school improvement plan, so you might as well not even bother. Just make it 2.
This is lovely, this, Harry. So if we dive into the lesson aspect of this, I'm really intrigued by this, because it's your classic kind of novice teacher and even experienced teacher mistakes, isn't it? Over planning. Like, it happens all the time, particularly if you're being observed. You never fit everything in, and then you've got that awful dilemma of, do you just try and whiz through it to try and get through to the really good stuff that you've planned? You've spent ages planning it. Or do you think, no, actually, I'm going to slow down? And it always ends up being a compromise that kind of satisfies nobody. What I also like about this, it reminds me of your classic kind of 80-20 rule where, 20% of your stuff is going to deliver 80% of the results, so focus on that. How does it work practically? So what kind of things do you often find teachers can cut out from their lessons that aren't needed? Are there any certain activities or parts of a lesson that can normally go?
So yeah, in some ways starting with the cutting is unhelpful, because actually the start point is like, what is the key thing that you want students to understand? What are they going to take away? How are you going to know if they've got it? What are the big misconceptions they might suffer, I guess is the word. And so that ideally that cutting would be done around that. I mean, I think there's probably a case that if you come back to the sort of Kirshner thing of you want cognitive activity and not activity, or not that activity is bad, but often it's like, oh, how can I get them to do this? I'm going to need this, we're going to need colours, there's going to be talking and so on. And like, what will it make them think? To now brought in Willingham and Kirshner, we're only like 5 minutes in. But so saying, okay, well, like, if we've got the key idea in the lesson, you probably only need like 1 or 2 activities that are going to be around it, and you can maybe cut off a lot of the, like, we're going to do this, we're going to do it, and cut it down to like, okay, as a historian, like, here's a text, we're going to read it, we're going to discuss the different bits in it, we might do a bit of writing about it, like we could get a lot out of this one text instead of what I might have done as a less experienced teacher, which would be like, I'm going to introduce the text, and then there's going to be a different writing activity, and then there's going to be a different thing. Well, actually, the text is probably quite hard, so giving students the time and the chance to pull it apart and make sense of it is going to be much more worthwhile. It's a bit of a roundabout answer, but hopefully it sort of answers your question.
It certainly does, Harry. And just a bit of a follow-up to that. One thing I've been dabbling with in maths, and I always wonder whether this transfers, so I'm thinking you're the ideal person for me to kind of test this out on here, right? So in maths, a mistake I used to make was I used to have loads of different types of activities that I'd wheel out for different topics. So it would be a certain topic when a certain type of task when I'm doing Pythagoras, and another one when I'm teaching quadratics and so on. What I'm trying to do now is have more kind of a collection of high value activities. So this would hopefully fit into your idea of kind of, less is more. That one of them would be like a Venn diagram, the structure of a Venn diagram. I can use that structure to get kids thinking hard about fractions, Pythagoras, quadratics, graphs and so on. And it may not lend itself as well as some of these more bespoke activities, but because we're focusing in on that structure, I get better as a teacher at using it, the kids get better as learners at using it, and it just feels like by reducing the number of types of things I'm doing with the kids over the course of a year, I just get the feeling it's better for everybody. Is that something that, well, first, does it fit into your tip? And does that transfer across to like a subject like history?
100%. In as much as I definitely felt this terror that, like, well, if I do the same thing I did with them 2 weeks ago, they'll be bored.
Yeah, that's it.
And actually, if you think about, like, every activity has the content you want them to learn, or the thing you want them to do, and then the knowing how the activity works. And the content is going to impose some cognitive load, and knowing how the activity works is going to impose some cognitive load. If the activity is new and the content's new, then you're making life harder for them. So actually, there's a sense in which if there were a single format for a lesson that you always did, now that potentially would get dull for you or for them, and there's definitely value in variety, and you want it to feel fresh, and sometimes you want to surprise them and so on. But actually, the real excitement history is really exciting, maths is really exciting, and the real excitement is about the content, not the box that you put it in. So actually saying, every time that we look at a piece of evidence, every time that we try and understand the causes of an event, we're always going to approach it in certain ways, is incredibly productive, because we can then think much harder about the causes of the event. And as a historian, that's the thing that I really want students to care about, more than I do the fact that I've come up with a really cool debate structure that's going to help us get into it. So like, it's efficient for you, it's efficient for them, just standardise, and maybe maybe it's 5 activities, maybe it's 10 activities. It doesn't have to be like just one, but I think it helps everyone.
That's lovely, that. So if we kind of dial up from the lesson level, you mentioned kind of school improvement plans and things. I've never been in a position, thank God, to have to write one of those. They sound painful. Is it practical to be able to shelve half of those kind of things and other things outside of the classroom?
I've never been in a position to write one of them either. But I can tell you a couple of things. One is that, so I spent 5 years doing a programme for heads of teaching and learning. So I was working with your head of CPD. And something that I quite consistently saw is that over the 2-year programme, they'd come in with here's the 20 things that we do in our CPD programme. And gradually they'd whittle it down. They'd end up saying, here are the 5 things, but they're really hard. And achieving some kind of change is really difficult. And so we spend... where previously it was we'll do questioning in a lesson. Well, questions are half term, because we need to talk about it, look at some evidence, try it out, come back to it. So in that sense, it's not just desirable; it's unavoidable. The other anecdote, I was briefly a school governor, so I was in a position that wasn't writing school improvement plans, but I was commenting on them. And I remember saying to the head teacher, who's a brilliant head teacher, there are too many things in this. It was like primary school. It was we're going to rewrite the curriculum in this. And I'm like, this is not going to happen. And she was like, no, it'll be fine. And I remember the next governor's meeting, she was like, in retrospect, Harry might have had a point that we have taken on too many things. And so I think it's it's like the classic: are you trying to cover the curriculum, or are you trying to make sure the students have learned it? And in the same way, if you want to say we've done something about these 20 items, and it was a 2-minute item in staff briefing, you can tick them all off. Changing human beings and changing our practices is slow and hard, and if you want that to really happen, you're going to have to make sure that you give it the time, and so you can't do 20 things at once. You can probably do 2.
It's fascinating, this. Just one more thing I just wanted to raise on this tip, and then I'll throw over to you just in case there's anything else. I've just spoken on a previous Tips for Teachers video with Gemma Sherwood, who's a maths teacher and oversees curriculum at Ormiston Academy. One of her tips was related to this, but to do with explanations. So essentially don't try and say too much when you're explaining things, be really kind of clear and concise. It feels to me that there's a similar thing going on here where I often made the mistake with my explanations of just trying to keep talking in the hope that some of the words are going to hit the kids' heads at some point and make some kind of sense. But it's a similar thing, isn't it? You can kind of either cognitively overload them, overwhelm them with stuff, but I find it quite hard to be really kind of concise. But it's the key, I think, to a good explanation and a good lesson and a good school improvement plan. Picking the kind of hard-hitting things, the impactful things, and focusing in on them, and the rest is kind of just noise that needs to go. Does that make sense?
So when I talk about models with teachers, I refer to one of my favourite findings about modelling, which is that actually, if you're showing students models and giving them an explanation, depresses their performance subsequently. And my suggestion is that when we start explaining, we start using big words like elegant or formal or this, that and the other. And actually the model does its own work. And it makes me think of what you talk about in How I Wish I Taught Maths, is say, well, actually, some of the best modelling is just silent modelling, because it allows students to concentrate on what's really going on. So the fewest words possible. On which note, I'm going to stop talking.
Nice, but we've got a plug-in for my book, Harry. That's bonus points there. That's brilliant stuff.
I've got 3 more coming up, don't worry.
Amazing, Harry. Right.